Today we're watching the 1948 classic anti-communist cartoon called Make Mine Freedom. It's pretty good. One of my favorites. Okay, so I'm going to start off, we're going to do a little bit of background and context just to put this in perspective so we know what it is that we're watching here. This movie was originally published and released in February of 1948. So just to kind of put that in perspective, the Allies, the Soviet Union, France, and Britain made their way into occupying the city of Berlin in Germany on July the 3rd, 1945. The Potsdam Conference in Germany was July the 17th of 1945. The atomic bombs, of course, were August 6th and August 12th. Of 1945, and of course we should hopefully remember that that's one of the things that helped to kind of accelerate this tension in the Cold War. September 2nd of 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared the creation of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. On September 6th, the Korean People's Republic was declared in North Korea. After that, what we see is that on March the 5th of 1946, Winston Churchill made his famous Iron Curtain speech in which Churchill talked about how Eastern Europe had fallen under an Iron Curtain because the Soviet Union had really taken control of Eastern Europe. On the 12th of March 1947, Harry Truman announced the Truman Doctrine, which was all about using containment policy to try to stop the spread of communism and of the Soviet Union. On June the 5th of 1947, that was the beginning of the Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe. And of course, billions and billions of dollars of American money to go to rebuild Western Europe so that it didn't fall to communism. And then, of course, here we are in February of 1948, and this particular cartoon gets released. It was originally supposed to be made by Walt Disney. However, Disney didn't really want anything to do with it, and so they referred the people who were paying for it, which is called the Sloan Foundation, they referred them to a guy named John Sutherland, who used to work for the Walt Disney Company as an animator and as a project coordinator. He had been let go in 1940 and had started doing his own thing. He made this production in a joint venture through the Extension Department of Harding College, who then produced it and then gave us the kind of justification for why we should oppose communism. And of course, remember, one of the things that's really important here is that World War II really exposed people for the first time to what communism was really like, especially under Stalin and the Soviet Union. Soviet soldiers were surrendering to American troops and putting on Nazi uniforms and saying, please take us to prison camp because we don't want to go back to the Soviet Union. And when people really started to learn that, some people in the United States, of course, continued to believe that communism was a good idea. Some people then became, even more anti-communist in 1945. And that really kind of brings us into this idea of the accelerating mental space, right? The headspace that people have when it comes to the Cold War. And I think that this cartoon really does a good job of showing, how people thought and what the kind of arguments were and what their point of view and perspective was when it comes to being anti-communist. So I think with that background out of the way and just kind of remembering where we are and what we're talking about and what's going on in the world at the time that this cartoon was produced helps us to really put it in a little bit better perspective. So without further discussion or ado, let's get started with the 1948 classic, Make Mine Freedom. Starts off very patriotic. Statue of Liberty.
America is many things to many people. To a 17-year-old kid, it's the malt shop on the corner. To Grandpa, it's the front porch in the cool of the evening.
Of course, a lot more of us are doing that.
Family, it's church on Sunday morning. And to Dad, it's his favorite relaxation.
Right. So first of all, let's think about what we've got already. We've got a lot of individual freedom, a lot of individual kind of liberty sort of stuff. Mom likes going to church and taking the family, and they're able to worship in their own way. Dad likes playing golf and deciding how to spend his time. Grandpa likes just hanging out on the porch. The young people like going out and associating with each other and going to the malt shop, which I know is real popular with everybody out there right now. It's all about this kind of individualized personal freedom and sort of the Enlightenment ideal of individualism.
Cracker Barrel philosophers in Crabtree Corners, and it's the tycoons in Wall Street.
Another thing to notice here is that when they show both sets of those people, right, the one group of people in the kind of nickel and dime shop in the middle of the country, and then these Wall Street tycoon sorts of people, what they're really focusing on here from the American point of view or the democracy point of view or the Enlightenment point of view is the kind of togetherness and uniformity that people really experience under a freedom-based system or a democratic-based system, right? So it doesn't matter if you're a Wall Street tycoon or if you're a farmer hanging out at the local feed store, right? We all kind of have similarities to each other, and we all kind of experience this freedom in very much the same way. So from our point of view, from the American point of view in this Cold War, we are looking more at this as a togetherness thing. We are all together. We are all unified. Even if we're different, we can still be different and still be unified and still be together.
It's all races, creeds, and religions. It's freedom to work at the job you like. Freedom of speech and to peaceably assemble. Freedom to own property.
And again, one of the really big things to keep in mind there is just the difference between capitalism as a functional system and communism as an economic system is the individual empowerment of the individual person in order to make decisions about what to do with their property, to own property outright in and of themselves, right? When in a communist system, of course, those things are owned and controlled for the good of all, practically speaking, by the state. And so it is the government that exercises control and decision-making processes over things like property and over things like even labor, right? So they can control, for example, what you do as a profession, whereas under the enlightened system and under the capitalist system, of course, we're talking about individual empowerment, right? Individualism versus kind of group modes of analysis. That's the major difference that this film is going to play up.
From unlawful search or seizure.
Where's your warrant, flatfoot?
Here he's talking specifically about ideas of the rule of law, where the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States says that in order to search you and seize your property, the government has to follow very specific patterns and very specific rules, and they've got to have a warrant according to the Constitution. It's not rule by a party. It's not rule by an ideology. It's a rule of law is really the point of view of the American perspective here.
The right to a speedy and public trial. Protection against cruel punishments and excessive fines. The right to vote and to worship God in your own way. It is these freedoms that have made America strong.
Okay, so we got our freedom, but management's lousing up everything.
Labor is at fault. It's ruining the country.
So there we've got the two different kind of classical Marxist perspectives, right? You've got the workers, you've got the proletariat who are blaming the bourgeoisie or the managers and saying that everything the managers do is wrong and they're the reason why everything's screwed up and they're ultimately to blame. And so ultimately then the idea is then we should have a revolution and take direct control of the means of production for ourselves. Whereas the bourgeoisie, the manager, says it's ultimately labor's fault and they're lazy and they don't want to do their jobs and we have to continue to exercise control over them. So this kind of mutual antagonism, that's the kind of beginning of the Marxist point of view, which is everything comes down to conflict between classes. And so this particular film is showing us that, when it comes to this perspective of disunity or conflict between the classes, ultimately that's the road towards, well, you'll see what's coming.
Constituents, as your elected representative,
We've also got the government guy.
I can assure you labor's right, management's right. I'm strictly neutral.
Labor, management, politicians, fooey. They can't tell corn from oats.
Why, only take the money out of
And of course, now, so what we've got is this conflict between the four major groups, right? The political class, the managerial class, the labor class, and the farmers. Four pieces of which every society needs to function, right? You got to have government, you got to have workers, you got to have managers, and you got to have farmers to feed everybody. And here what we see is this kind of disunity, and everybody's in conflict with each other. And look what that opens up. Look what that allows for, is when there is disunity between these people, and when they don't mutually come together to recognize the fact that they're all similar and they're all sharing in their ideals of freedom and justice and constitutionalism and that sort of thing. When that disunity starts up, here's where this film at least tells us it takes us.
Hurry, step right up, folks. Here's the answer to your problems. Dr. Utopia's sensational new discovery, ism. Ism will cure any ailment of the body politic. It's terrific. It's tremendous. Once you swallow the contents of this bottle, you'll have the bountiful benefit of higher wages, shorter hours, and security.
Higher wages, shorter hours, and security. You can't be fired, you're going to get more benefits, and you're going to work less time. So, of course, ism in the bottle, the magical formula that Dr. Utopia is hawking here, fixes all the problems that labor has. All you got to do is trust him and what's in his bottle.
Enormous profits, no strikes.
Enormous profits and no strikes, so the bourgeoisie should be happy with this too, right? We can end this conflict right now if only you swallow ism.
You're the big boss.
Government control, no worry about votes, name your own salary.
Government control, don't worry about votes, and name your own salary. So the government, of course, as the dictatorship of the proletariat, gets to determine everything. And so ultimately, you no longer are accountable to the constituency.
Your crops, lower cost. Why, ism even makes the weather perfect every day.
So he's promising everything to everybody. Everybody can be happy and everyone can be uniformly in the benefit. Everything will be maximized. All you got to do is trust me and trust what I put in this bottle of ism.
And now then, because we are introducing this amazing item for the first time in this country, it isn't going to cost you 1 cent. All you have to do is sign this little scrap of paper and you get your bottle absolutely free.
I hereby turn over to Ism Incorporated everything I have, including my freedom and the freedom of my children and my children's children, in return for which said ism promises to take care of me forever.
So the idea here, and one of the big things to note here about the way that people during the Cold War viewed communism is, first of all, you've got to make everybody a victim. Everybody has to be a victim of something, right? Farmers feel like they're being victimized by workers and the industrial class and the government. The government feels as though it has to play the middle and constantly worry about what the voters worry about and what the bourgeoisie and what the proletariat worries about, what the farmers worry about. Labor's concerned about management, management's concerned about labor. It starts off where everybody's a victim of somebody else, and so everybody's got these problems that they've ultimately got to deal with. And so now communism comes in and it's going to ultimately extend to all of these people the solution to their problem, and to this kind of removal of victimhood status. That's really crucially important to understand, is that it is the victimization that has to happen first in order for communism to be appealing to people, right? That's why during things like the Great Depression and right before World War II, that's why communism was really appealing to people, is because they felt victimized.
Get out of the way!
Pardon me.
And who are you, my good man?
I'm John Q. Public.
Ah, my fine friend, you're just in time to share this generous and gigantic offer. Sign right here.
Mind if I read it first?
Hurry up!
Now, this is something that rings true today, and I want you guys really seriously to think about this. When people feel victimized, when people feel powerless, when people feel like things are going really bad, look at how quick they are to sign away their freedom in exchange for the promise of security. It's something that we need to watch for and be very careful of always, but it's something that really we can understand this better now in 2020 than maybe previous years.
Shirts on, boys. Including my freedom. Freedom? Well, sign away my freedom. Why, this is ridiculous.
Don't be corny, brother.
Sure, our
system of free enterprise isn't perfect. But before we throw it away for some imported double talk,
I like how he has to make note of the fact that communism is foreign, right? And rather than importing some foreign ideas, though somehow being foreign makes it not as good. It's not that communism is not a bad idea in and of itself, it's that it's foreign that makes a problem, right? It definitely shows us the kind of mindset of people in the 1940s, is that if it's not from the United States, it must be bad because it's foreign.
let's turn the clock back a few years to see what it's done for us. For example, back in the 1890s, Joe Dokes was just a guy who liked to tinker around his barn. Some people thought Joe was lazy. Some even thought he was nuts. But one day, he had an idea.
Now, this is important because it's not about what the rest of the people think, right? Other people think he's crazy. Other people think that he's just lazy. He decides for himself, though. And when Joe Dokes decides he's going to spend his time tinkering around inside of his garage, he is free to do that under the free enterprise system, under laissez-faire economics, under capitalism. That's really what they're playing to here, right? Joe Dokes can do his own thing, and you all might think he's crazy and nuts, but it doesn't matter what you think, because in our system here, he gets to decide what to do and look at what the consequences are.
And because he was free to dream his dream and tinker, Joe had a chance to make something of himself and his idea. So, of course, some people didn't think so much of Joe's idea. But that didn't stop him. So Joe got some money from young Aunt Minnie and Uncle Angus and Grandpappy.
Now remember, this is an important part of the free enterprise system and of capitalism, because individuals own capital. Individuals own property that is then theirs to dispose of as they want to. So Joe Dokes needs startup capital. He needs money to start building his machines and buying his factory and having space to put all of his factories and his production capacity. So he goes to investors who then invest in his business of their own free will. Right? They decide what to do with their capital. They decide what to do with their property. And when they decide to invest it into Joe Dokes' business, that's their decision, just like it's his decision to start the enterprise, the business in and of itself.
And Mr. Titus. When Joe's friends and relatives used their savings to help him buy tools and property, they were capitalists.
Now look, they're all capitalists. That doesn't sound like something we want to be. Aren't those exploitive people who run factories and who put children in mines, like in the first part of industrialization? Oh, we don't want to be capitalist. But when we talk about the 20th century in particular, being a capitalist just means investing your own savings, investing your own money into some system of free enterprise. Well, that doesn't require you to put children into mines. All that means is you're taking a risk of investing your money with the expectation that you're going to get some kind of return.
Folks, it's nothing to be ashamed of.
See? Nothing to be ashamed
Now,
of.
naturally, Joe needed some help. So he hired Willie Lumpkin, who was out of work anyway. And before long, Willie had the know-how and became skilled labor. Because capital, management, and labor worked together, Joe's idea grew. It grew and did things even he never dreamed of. Today, the automobile industry provides millions of jobs that never existed before. And remember, this is a story of only one industry. There are thousands more scattered all over the United States whose history of development is pretty much the same. We've built a country under the American system that sends more young people to high school and college than all the rest of the world combined. Why, even in the Depression, our wages bought more food, clothing, travel, and entertainment than the wages of any other people in the world.
This is important, too, because they're really trying to emphasize the fact that the Enlightenment idea of Adam Smith, of capitalism, of laissez-faire economics, has produced a greater standard of living than any system that comes before, as opposed to the communist system, which comes from the 19th century, that ultimately said what we need to do is to fix the problems of feeding everybody and equality and equal outcomes for all people. But of course, when we see it in practice in places like the Soviet Union and in communist China and North Korea, we don't necessarily see that it actually improves the standard of living at all, and it costs, hundreds of millions of lives in some cases.
Our country has a national income equal to the total national incomes of any other 6 nation in the world. With only 7% of the Earth's, we drive 70% of the world's automobiles. That's just a sample of the things the capitalistic system has given us in only 160 years. Before signing up, you boys ought to try a little taste of Doctorism's formula to see what you'd get in exchange for your freedom. Go ahead, try it.
And again, this is important too, because especially in the 1930s, particularly around the Great Depression, a lot of people in the Western world and a lot of people in the United States really believed in communism, and they joined the Communist Party. There was a relatively healthy Communist Party in the United States, and one of the reasons for that is people really believed in the narrative promoted by socialist realism and all of that information which Stalin himself controlled. A lot of people looked at that and said, this is the way that it really is in the Soviet Union, and this is really great. And it wasn't until we had that, more direct experience with communism, when we had a direct interaction with the Red Army, and when we saw how things were actually being done in Eastern Europe, and when people started to escape into places like West Berlin, once we saw the consequences of that, that's when people really get this real experience and this real, what is communism really actually like? Not what is it like on paper, and not what does Stalin want you to believe it's like, what is it really like? So that's what we're going to see. Well, they take a big swig of ism.
You can't do this to me! I'll strike!
The state forbids strikes.
See, so labor thought that they were going to be taken care of because, of course, this was the workers' revolution, right? That's what Lenin talked about, is the workers should rise up and seize control of the means of production until the government gets control. And once the government gets control, then the government owns your labor, which means you don't get to decide what you get paid. You don't get to decide how long you work. You don't get to go on strike to try to form your own, benefits and raise your standard of living. The government decides for you, and if you disagree with the government, guess who wins? You're chained to your machine there.
Wait till the union hears about this!
Ah, yes, the union. Welcome to our ranks, number 1313.
The government runs the union, too.
I'll take this case to the Supreme Court.
The state is the Supreme Court. Our decision is as follows. No more private property. No more you.
And that's called nationalization, right? When the government comes in and takes control of the means of production, seizes the capital, and of course, by extension, seizes the labor as well. That's called nationalization, and it's a fundamental part of the communist system, or even of a socialist system, is the ownership and control of the means of production by the government and by the state. For the, what they say is it's for the purpose of making sure that everybody equally benefits. But hopefully, if you've seen the other videos that I did on communism in the 20th century, you know that that's not always really the case.
The farm vote put a stop to this.
Farmers don't vote anymore.
What'll they do for seed next year?
You won't have to worry about next year. The state will do your planning from now on.
And again, that's your 5-year plans, right? That's Stalinism right off the bat. We're going to move you onto a state farm, and we're going to control your labor, and we're going to take control of your production. We saw that, and again, I'm referring to my other videos that I've done, but in the Soviet Union, in China, in Vietnam, in Korea, in North Korea at least, you see that these types of things are really happening. Cambodia is another one under Pol Pot.
We must fight to regain our freedom, or everything is lost. Everything!
Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
I love it. record player says state propaganda speaker, because of course when you're in the government, and we can see this now, right now today, when it comes to look at what's happening in the world, and then take a look at statistics coming out of China, right? Everybody in the Communist Party in China says everything's great, we've handled the situation just fine, and then they're getting, you know, orders of 3,000 urns into a city in a single day when that city only had like 500 people dying officially, because of course that's what everybody in the Communist Party is going to toe the line and tell you is everything's great, we've controlled it, just keep us, you know, in charge of all the power and we'll keep you safe forever. That's why China's numbers are so low, right?
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
When anybody preaches disunity, tries to pit one of us against the other through class warfare, race hatred, or religious intolerance.
And again, there it is. It's this idea of unity in America, right? Unity within our system, and despite the fact that we're all different and we're all diverse, and that's great because that's what freedom produces, right? Freedom produces inequality and difference, and that's okay. But what we have to realize is the thing that brings us together isn't that we all have to be the same. The thing that brings us together is that we all mutually enjoy the fact that we can express our freedom and our individuality in the way that we choose to, whether other people like it or not. Remember, Joe Dokes, everybody laughed at him and thought he was crazy, but ultimately, he was right in the end, and he produced the auto industry, right?
You know that person seeks to rob us of our freedom and destroy our very lives. And we know what to do about it.
And now, gentlemen, no violence, please. And don't throw those bubbles. Don't throw those bubbles! No!
Now, does that necessarily mean that violence is the answer too? There's an academic actually right now today in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. His name is Tony Perucci. In 2012, he wrote a book called Paul Robeson and the Cold War Performance Complex. And one of the things that he said about this is that Make Mine Freedom really shows us that mob violence against communist instigators is celebrated as patriotic. With Looney Tunes style music, the raging mob attacks the communist, running him out of town as his screams fade into a patriotic fife and drum. Now, I think maybe Tony's playing that up a little bit, but definitely this idea of unity and unification, and we're all together on the same team, it's here.
Of material and spiritual values for all. That is the secret of American prosperity.
So there you go. That was the 1948 classic Make Mine Freedom. I hope that this was good for you. I hope that it was informative. Once I post a video, leave comments down below. Hit me up with anything else, and then I'll see you guys for the next live stream a week from today. Next Friday, we're going to look at some more Cold War stuff. Actually, we're going to be looking at a video called You Can Survive the A-Bomb. And we'll see what the advice was in the 1950s for how to survive the atomic bomb. So otherwise, I hope everybody is staying healthy and safe. Feel free to leave a like if you liked it. Check out some of the other videos. Share, subscribe to get notifications when new stuff comes up. And I will see you guys next time around. See ya.